Welcome to Shardcast, the Brandon Sanderson podcast. We're a bunch of mega fans giving you the news, discussion, and of course, a whole lot of opinions about Brandon's works in the Cosmere. I'm Eric, and joining me is Joshua.
Hi, I am Joshua, and I'm not used to going second in the list. This is weird.
I know. I don't think this has ever happened for you, but you know what? You're second this time. That's how it
the
works.
Babies that are on. But I go by Joshua online.
Yes, and I don't think I've been on a podcast with you in a very long time.
It's been a while.
Yeah. Also joining us is Verónica.
Hello, I go by Cheyenne Sedai on the Discord and forums.
Next up, we got Adim.
Hey, I'm X.
And lastly, we have Bonnie.
Hi, I'm Cosmeregirl.
Excellent. And I am Chaos. And today, everyone, Brandon recently did an interview. Well, he did an interview on our channel. You should go check that out. But he also did an interview on the website Winter is Coming, which was also good. Brandon just commented a bunch on Reddit about his thoughts on the reaction to Wind and Truth. And we thought that we'd have a lot to talk about that. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So I think that'll be very fun. Because everyone knows that the Wind and Truth reactions was not controversial at all. I'm sure the YouTube comments will be great on this one. Will be good. But Brandon, you know, totally. he's always a class act and had lots of lovely things to say. And we're going to go through all of those now. A lot of this started because in the interview, the interview had in Winter is Coming, had a bunch of things. We'll link it in the description. Go check it out. I guess I haven't actually listened to the full interview, and just their articles. So
same.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Most of it is like, I don't know, stuff that I've seen him say multiple times, stuff that people have been talking about lots of places. So there's some good nuggets in there, but nothing like revolutionary.
But with Wind and Truth, he was talking about how like he wanted Wind and Truth to feel like uncomfortable in a way. That was a bit interesting. Like what does Brandon mean? And so Brandon's going to go into, I think, what we would lovingly call artsy fartsy stuff, which Brandon says artsy English major BS. So, you know, cool. And so that's what we're going to get into. There's so much that Brandon said that we'll probably not read this entire block all at once. We're probably going to stop and comment on each thing as we go. And so Brandon will talk about all your favorite things in Wind and Truth, like Child Champion, Jasnah Debate, humor in modern language, all the things everyone loves about Wind and Truth. That's been...
I think that Joff's survey numerically proves that those are all universally beloved aspects of the book.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, Joff, you actually did a survey on Reddit and so you have data. Do you want to talk a little bit about data before we get into the show?
No, I was just curious. Like the reaction to Wind and Truth has been spicy, and it's just I was curious to know, like, I don't know to dig through the noise and try and figure out like how do people actually feel about the book and all these different aspects of the book. So I posted a survey. Most of the responses are on Reddit, but I also posted it on Facebook and got responses from there on 17th Shard, Discord. So there's like a sources coming from a few different places, mostly fans. So this is like the survey is definitely skewed towards we are fans in fan spaces who read the book.
Yeah, not the average reader.
Which is fine. Like these are the people that I interact with. And I was curious to know, how do they feel about the book? How do they rank this book compared to the others? How do the fans feel about the Jasnah Debate? Things like this. So yeah, it was an interesting survey that I think has some cool insights. I think maybe we'll get into it, maybe some snippets from that as we go.
Cool.
So some people went on Reddit to talk about this interview and especially kind of these more controversial elements. And Brandon stepped in to say, so the interview where I talked about this didn't feel like the right place to dig into it deeply, but perhaps I can do a little bit more here. As a forward, though, this might get into artsy English major BS. It's how I feel about the piece and part of what I was trying to do. But whether it was practical application to actual readers, your mileage may vary. The goal here was to give a sense of disquietude in Wind and Truth by breaking the formula in uncomfortable ways, leading to a sense of uncertainty while reading the book a sense of something was off that the average reader, which may not include people in this subreddit, wouldn't pick up on directly, except for a sense of something being out of tune as they read. He says, Kaladin is part of this. For the first time, Kaladin won't be there for the main climax of the book. Not only that, but he is learning to play the flute while Adolin is living through the worst hell of his life. There's a great deal more. Shallan seems to be backsliding in a way that doesn't make sense. A giant war is going on and Dalinar isn't there to participate. The pacing is estranged by intention. And instead of opening action sequence as is common in Stormlight books, there is this disquieting sense of things breaking apart. Kaladin saying goodbye, Shallan and Adolin splitting, Dalinar and Navani being torn away from their kingdom. Instead of fast, slow, fast, as has been the general pacing of Stormlight books, it is slow for a distressing amount of time and then jerky, jumping between viewpoints faster than Stormlight's books generally do, with far more leaning on a variety of viewpoint characters than previous books have had.
I know people have complained that the viewpoints switch too much in their book, and they do.
Yeah, I know even in the preview, when we saw that they were swapping POVs like within the chapter instead of doing like one POV per chapter, which had been the norm. There was a lot of discussion about that even then.
It's an interesting part of the book. I don't think that I personally mind it. It definitely builds, like, he uses that normally in climaxes to build a sense of tension, of fast paced action. It's a little bit weird sometimes for me in this book where it wears you out faster, I think. It makes the whole book feel like it's running at fast pace. And I think maybe the challenge is, like, with a book this large, it's hard to, there is a sense of kind of out of discomfort that we're moving this fast and we've got so much more to go.
I have a friend and he said Wind and Truth felt just exhausting to read. And I've never felt that in a Stormlight book. And so I was just glad it was done for like these reasons. And so clearly it's intentional on Brandon's part that he's doing that. And there is a purpose for it, but it's not going to work for everyone, right?
And I think it's interesting when you think about how point of view was handled, like in the Wheel of Time, and how it shifted as the books went on. Like Robert Jordan had this tendency for like long blocks of point of view, and then when we got to Brandon's books, Brandon was shifting faster, but it wasn't so much like within the chapter many times, or it was like maybe 2 max per chapter or something like that. And I do think I remember the Wheel of Time chapters being longer than Stormlight anyway. And then like as you get to the Brandon Avalanche and the climax and that ginormous chapter that is the last battle, like you start shifting a lot. And Brandon has always done this in his books, like towards the climax, like you were saying. But I think that part of that like very like quick shifting, I do think that while not everybody felt the book was meant to be exhausting, I do think that is a little bit of that disquietude that Brandon wanted to generate. It wasn't meant to be paced like a normal Stormlight book, and while we were going through 10 days, which is very fast, but the book is also ginormous, the point of view shifts were there to like try to help like give that sense of a lot happening in a very short amount of time, but also like it's a lot to carry, especially just coming off from Rhythm of War. This was one of those tools that Brandon was trying to use to generate that disquietude. And it works for some people better than it does for others. But I do think it was pretty intentional, and like you can see it in this answer.
As you both pointed out, it's like generally he saves these kinds of mid-chapter changes for the climax. And so I know that when the book initially started out reading like this, it was sort of like, oh, is he going to be like at climax pacing for the entire book? You know, for all, 17,000 pages or whatever.
17,000.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Which I feel like sort of, it does create a, like, he's writing in that mold. And so as readers, we're sort of trained at this point to expect certain like, beats of like, climactic action or whatever with this kind of POV switching, but he's writing it slow, just with a fast like style. So I can see that you could describe the sense that the reader would get from that as being disquiet. But I guess, at least for me, I felt like often the things that were being jumped between were like, I would have preferred to have this fast jump, like frenetic jumping between POVs within the same sort of area. Instead of like within a chapter, we're like jumping across the continent or something between chapters. And I guess that would, because he wants to have that dichotomy of like characters going through a lot of different stuff very close together within the book.
Mhm.
You make a really good point there. With I'd actually forgotten initially. My reaction was I expected we were going to have an early Sanderlanche. Just when we were getting the preview chapters, I thought we were going to get maybe an early mini climax, and then more steady book, and then another major climax.
Like Rhythm of War. Yeah.
And so I kept expecting that to hit, and it didn't hit.
It's really interesting because Brandon's talked for a long time that like epic fantasy, you can't necessarily keep like a fast pace for like a Stormlight book. And then he's kind of deliberately doing that, but it is on purpose to make you feel this. So it's interesting. I can see why it's like, yeah, this maybe people wouldn't necessarily like.
The other thing about cutting so fast between so many points of view is that, like, normally when you're doing that in a climax, you're cutting very fast between points of view where, like, lots of things are happening, where, like, what's happening in that point of view specifically feels like climactic and fast and action-packed. Here, you're cutting very fast from things that aren't fast, from Kaladin playing the flute and the spiritual realm and, like, all these things that are climactic in terms of like pace and action and the way they're written. So that also feels kind of off because you're used to that pacing with things that are happening like constantly, like in the middle of the battle, and you're cutting between POV scenes and everything is happening all at once, and you're following like these different POVs kind of like in the movie. It doesn't feel that way when you're cutting very fast between things that are slower plot-wise, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, this is largely where I think like the personal taste comes in, right? Because he's doing something that sort of he's intentionally breaking this convention, breaking these expectations, kind of what it feels right. And for some people, like it's going to be, you're going to, even if you understand like the artistic decision behind that and what that's doing, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to like it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I imagine part of it is that you're not supposed to like it. In a sense, right?
Yeah.
I think
there's a distinction between like not liking it in a way that makes you not like the book, in a way that like makes you not like it, but there's you understand that and you kind of respect and appreciate what that does in a way, you know. There's characters that like you don't like the character, but like where the author doesn't want you to like the character,
but you still like the
sometimes
product.
It works and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
One more structural thing I'd say, because that's sort of this section of his response was about like the structure, how he played with the structure to try and give the reader a certain feel. I think that going with the like 10-day ending with the Contest of Champion decision that he went with, I felt like it also sort of created a lot of tension with this idea of trying to play with the pacing of the book, because it meant that I felt that some storylines were sort of artificially extended so that everything would start happening right in like day, 8 through 10. And so in addition to having like, really fast cuts between Khaled and, playing the flute or whatever, it also means that like we have like a fast cut to, Sigil fighting on the Shattered Plains or something, and nothing really happens, or like moments happen, but it doesn't really progress. It's like, oh, we lost, some random plateau. Okay, we'll move to another plateau. And I feel like that was done because he wanted to have the like, Yasmin losing the debate and then setting up this thing with the singers taking the Shattered Plains and all that stuff happening and like happening at the end. Yeah. To sort of stack a bunch of climaxes on top of each other instead of doing one big one. But I felt like in the preceding several days where we're still maintaining this pace without really doing anything, it felt like running on treadmill for some plot points. Like for the Adolin plot line, I thought it worked, but
Adolin plot line, yeah, that totally worked.
I saw someone online commenting that it actually worked really well for them, that they liked the pacing and how it jumps because it kind of kept them going and focused in the book. I know for me with the pacing, I like it artistically. I think it's a really neat artistic decision, especially the different pieces he did to kind of pull it together, not just the swapping scenes, but having characters doing things you don't expect them to be doing, having characters in different places than you would expect them to be. I think it's a really interesting way of writing it. For me, it was harder to get sucked into it, and especially for a book as long as this one, it did make it a little harder to get through all of it. I really like the feeling of being sucked into a book, and it was harder to get sucked into this one.
I will say that I was totally sucked into the book and was pulled all the way through. I think for me, the 10-day structure, like going off the structural aspect, is that some characters seem to have busy work, like the monasteries felt a little busy work, even though I think a lot of those fights are really cool. Some of the best Stormlight fights we've had. And so like that's kind of a consequence of the day structure. But I like viewpoint switching a lot. So that was great. I love that. And yeah, I'll leave it there. We've talked about Sigil and stuff, and we'll talk about him more at some point, but we don't need to get into it.
Yeah, we've really focused, I think, on the pacing part, but Brandon started this talking about some other things that are maybe worth mentioning. He talks about Kaladin being away. He talks about Shallan backsliding down Arthur. And I mostly want to come back to this because I disagree with Brandon a little bit on I don't quite understand his comment. Maybe you guys have an opinion on it.
No, do it.
Kaladin, like to me, Kaladin being away did not feel very, unusual to me. He spends time like away from the group in other sections. I kind of expected he kind of intrudes maybe a little bit on Zeth's story to some extent. So I never like felt like he was sidelined exactly. He's not fighting. He's not maybe doing his like warrior thing because he's doing the therapy thing. But I don't know. I just didn't feel like I don't feel like Kaladin gave me a sense of something being off.
I think it's more. And this is actually a thing where I think I disliked Wind and Truth a bit because of this, that all of our characters are split up. And in every Stormlight book, Kaladin is there at the big climactic battle doing the big climactic thing. And so, like, he is doing a very important thing, right, in this book, for sure. But he's not at the contest and has nothing to do with the contest itself. And I think that's what's supposed to feel weird. That's like, but the exciting stuff's happening over here. Why are we in Shinovar? What does that matter?
Like, it's strange because I like that other people had the chance to be in that like big climax, and that it wasn't only the Kaladin show all over again. But on the other hand, I was expecting something much more like Oathbringer, Words of Radiance, where everybody is together.
Yeah.
And Brandon had actually kind of promised it before. Not in the book so much, but as in Words of Brandon, and just talking about the structure of this like part of Stormlight specifically, as in the first 5 books. He was like, okay, Way of Kings, we're going to have these separate climaxes, with Shallan, and then on the Shattered Plains. And then Words of Radiance, everyone is together. We have this huge battle. Oathbringer, same thing. Rhythm of Words, a little bit more separate again, because you have the stuff at Urithiru and the other people like elsewhere. And then Wind and Truth, because it was the end of like the section, you would expect, and Brandon did say like, okay, we're going to be back to a big climax in Wind and Truth. Brandon is known for his climaxes.
I mean, it was a big climax. It's just everyone was split up, which was like, yeah, it was
a big climax, but it wasn't an Oathbringer climax where everybody's together and everything is going on at the same time in the same place.
Yeah.
And so that was different than I expected. And so it feels a little bit strange, but I also like that it wasn't the Kaladin show all the time.
Expectations could be a big part of it, because I certainly did not expect everybody to be at the same place. And I think a lot of that comes from Wheel of Time. To me, like a series like this big, it needs to like, I don't know, have like, I want the endings to be related, like thematically and like story wise to be like, to matter with like to one end. But I didn't expect Kaladin to like show up at the contest.
No.
So maybe that's part of it.
I feel like a lot of that expectation came from before we knew what Kaladin's plotline would be. It's more of like general like series structure. Yeah. And then once we realized that Kaladin was going to Shinovar, I was like, okay, I don't think he's gonna be able to get back.
And it's like, but like, what is he doing? Why is that important? Type thing, Yeah.
I also feel like his like finale at Oathbringer like mattered, like was less of a big thing, a climactic thing than the ending here. This feels more like Words of Radiance, Way of Kings Kaladin than Oathbringer Kaladin to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, certainly there's stuff Kaladin went through in Oathbringer for sure, but he was still there for plenty of spear fightings for a long time in Oathbringer.
I think for me, part of it is the role. Is he plays a very different role in this book. It's less where he is, more that he's kind of sidelined almost while Zeth is doing his story. And I think another part of it is that his climax, he didn't necessarily feel like he had to struggle for his climax in this book. He kind of almost fell into the climax. Zeth is the one who did the struggling. Kaladin fell into the climax.
Yeah.
True, yeah.
I mean, I would agree on Job's point about where Kaladin was, and even to pretty much mostly where he ended the story were not sort of unexpected to me, at least after having read Rhythm of War. And, we're told in that book, you're going to Shinovar. I expected Kaladin to be in Shinovar.
Sure.
And even more than that, like he was told you're going to be trying to therapize Zeth and Ishar. And so I expected him to do that in Wind and Truth.
Did do that for sure.
Yeah. So I would agree that like that part of it isn't really like, I didn't get much disquieting from that because it was sort of an expectation that I came into the book with. Sort of plot points that he would have to be hitting.
There's an interesting thing that Brandon gets into a little bit later in some different contexts in these questions or responses, talking about like the distinction between the fans and like what the hardcore fans are expecting versus like what the general audience is expecting, what the people 10 years from now reading this will be expecting. And so that's also, I think, part of it is I'm saying this is my experience and what I expected with Kaladin, which is maybe completely way off from what most people are thinking.
I think you can still logically know he's going to Shinovar, but still be like, but Kaladin, but like he's John Stormlight. He's gonna be in the climax of the book, right? Like, and so it's just like, but why are we?
Yeah.
What's important in Shinovar? And certainly, I think in reading, you're like, why are we in Shinovar? And the Wind's like, I mean, it's important. You got to be there. But why though?
Because the Wind said so.
Because the Wind said so. One comment, like Brandon did say, like a giant war is going on and Dalinar isn't there to participate. I think that is a critique I hear a lot, that like, the spiritual realm stuff went on for a long time and is maybe a bit repetitive.
I do have thoughts on the spiritual realm, but I do want to make a sarcastic jab at Brandon because Dalinar was also not terribly involved in the war in the book called Rhythm of War, where he was like standing in the back for most of it.
To be fair, that is very funny, but that is also because Brandon is like balancing so many POVs and like he's giving more to Navani, and so Dalinar is getting the treatment he got in Words of Radiance, where he got less. And so Brandon's like, oh yeah, you're going to have a lot more in book 5. So I do just have to balance the characters some, but that is still very funny. Not a lot of war in the book Rhythm before, oddly enough, which is a little weird, but that's fine.
I guess on the spiritual realm stuff, just I was quick wondering, like show of hands, did anyone think that they wouldn't get out of the spiritual realm in time for the contest?
No, they were always going to get out.
I don't know if I had an expectation, because I did think that like something would, we were not going to do the contest and have outcome A or outcome B. It was always going to be option C. And I didn't know how we were going to get to that. So I guess maybe I would have considered that a possibility.
Great way of phrasing it.
I don't know. I feel like if you end book 4 in, hey, let's have a contest on the top of Urithiru in 10 days, like, I feel like we're going to get there. Like, it would be weird if they didn't.
They could have had the contest in the spiritual realm also. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. But certainly I did think they were going to get out.
Yeah, I just asked that because it felt like pointing out that Dalinar was like ripped away from his kingdom and unable to participate in the war. It felt to me like the spiritual realm was maybe meant to feel like they weren't really getting much done. And it was just like stalling them. And we were supposed to be like frustrated in a good way that they were like, we were supposed to be stressed that they wouldn't be able to do what they needed to do.
To
me, I didn't really, I never felt that it was a realistic threat that they would like lose the contest by not showing up or something like that.
To be fair to like his comment that I'm making fun of about the war. I think Brandon's intent here is not like he's not part of like the fighting. The point is like things are happening and they need their bondsmith there, and Dalinar's away, right? And that's certainly something I felt. There's times in the spiritual realm where I'm like, why are you guys here? You need to, my issue I think is less that I want Dalinar to be like involved in the rest of the story, and more that I was just like frustrated by what they were doing in the spiritual realm. So there's a few things going on there.
My thing with the spiritual realm is that on one hand, I like all the lore and the history we got because it's very interesting. But on the other hand, it does feel kind of disconnected from the rest of the book.
Yeah.
And so it feels weird. And I get that's the point, but it also is a little bit frustrating, like Joff was saying. It's just like
that's the interesting. That's the kind of the bottom line I think of all this is Brandon's kind of saying there's a lot of stuff happening here that like feels weird, and that's intentional. Like I wanted you to be frustrated with some things. All right, so let's continue with Brandon's comments here on this. He says, as it goes, there's the uncomfortable sense that none of this is going to get fixed, that it's going to stay this way, despite this being a climactic book. The sense of stress to the book shouldn't simply be Kaladin is away. It should be all of these things together, leading to the uncomfortable conclusion that you're not seeing a series wrap up, but a series unravel. Now, I don't say this to detract from anyone's criticisms of the book, just as an explanation for what I'm doing. The goal is a symphony going further and further out of tune until you realize, wait, this isn't going to correct. It's going to stay that way, which I think is really appropriate. Stormlight harmonies and symphony and music is a kind of cool meta aspect of the theme here.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about this when we analyze our interviews comments. Brandon went into this as well with the arc of Stormlight doesn't work if the heroes win in this book, right? Like he wanted, something horrible to happen here. I think he said like a symphony all going atonal and then progressing from there. And that really worked for me personally.
You see, there's a little bit of a shift here in what he's talking about. He says, I did push the language too far modern, which has been one thing that's been a part of the conversation a lot. I also recognize that several of the revelations, like Gav as champion, are disliked by the community here in general. They were disliked by beta readers. Issue for me is that having watched over other big fantasy series play out, my gut says these revelations will work for readers who haven't spent years theorizing on them. A reader that will never exist again, as nobody will ever read, would never need to wait 15 years for this book again. We're in a little bit of uncharted territory, since the general inclination for my peers has been to change revelations like this once they're figured out by the community. My gut has been to stick with my guns, to trust that in the long run, the well-foreshadowed answer is the correct one. It's still uncomfortable and wrong. It's not playing by Stormlight rules. It's supposed to do that because the battle isn't about Gav. Hint, the actual battle and conclusion is not about what happens to Gav. It's about what Dalinar and Taravangian each do after. Y'all would have almost certainly guessed the ending of Hero of Ages years before the book came out, if I were writing it now, and would have likely made the choices at that ending controversial because they had been guessed for years and seemed pedestrian by the time the book launched. Regardless, I'm confident the choice of champion is the right choice. Yeah, so he's happy with his decision there.
I do agree that switching to a thing because fans guessed it is not wise. That's actually such a good point.
Infamous examples of that.
Yes, absolutely. But it's so funny. The reader who's theorizing will never exist ever again. I'm like, oh, that's really interesting, right? Like 10 years from now, they're just going to read straight through. Have fun with the Cosmere connections with that, guys. But but like they're just going to go straight through.
Yeah, and I think that in the end, like if you change those things to make it satisfying for the readers now, in the future it won't be satisfying. Like again, there's this infamous example in the Wheel of Time, which by the end of book 6, people had kind of guessed what Jordan was going to do with a specific character. If you've read the series, you know what I'm talking about, but I am not going to spoil it here. But he was going to do something with a certain character, and people had guessed by the end of the series that character felt kind of weird. Like once they actually started getting a role, and it felt a little bit like it came out of nowhere. like when you got to a memory of light, and you go back to the notes, and the people who had access to those notes discovered that Jordan changed his plan midway. And we're not sure exactly where it happened, but it definitely happened after book 6 when people had guessed. But you can definitely feel in the fandom how that choice to change it felt strange, because it would have been better if it had stayed the same and people would have guessed it. You know, fandoms like ours that theorize so much
Everyone guesses everything.
have that inevitable problem. Everybody
Yes.
guesses everything. And you might not guess a lot of those things if you're just a casual reader.
Probably don't.
And especially if you're reading like straight through, you don't have time to theorize.
Yeah. Or if you're
And
just like
so-
reading other books, like many people do
Uh-huh.
between these, right? It's
Yes.
just like, yeah, I didn't really remember the details or things. But
Mhm. And things that feel so obvious to us, feel so pervasive. I mean, the whole
Yeah.
Chana thing, or even like we guessed long before Rhythm of War, the whole like we chose the sequence, and the execution made it feel special, but the
That's true.
actual like
yeah.
plot information,
Yeah. Like the spread had to be
I mean,
in on it. Yeah,
I
for sure.
remember-
Right.
Like I remember like listening to Shardcast backlog and this being a point of discussion in Oathbringer reactions.
Yeah.
And those are some of the earliest Shardcasts out there.
Yep.
So like
Yeah.
it's
And I
just
guess,
an
like-
inevitable problem, and I do think that this was the right choice in the long run, as weird as it feels now.
I mean, like gaming out. I think that all this talk about like changing stuff up in response to reader guesses, I think is in this comment at least is targeted at Baby Champ and Gavinor being the champion.
Absolutely. Yeah. Totally.
Because like the fandom, as you said, also guessed like Chana being Shalon's mother and stuff like that. I mean, gaming out like what Brandon could have changed this to with while still getting like the broad same ending. I mean, you know, he's an actual writer, so I'm sure he could come up with better ideas. But I think that it's like basically you have to somehow get through this. There has to be a champion, there has to be a fight so that we can move on to what Dalinar and Terabithia end up actually doing. And so like other than having like someone like Gavinor as the champion, I don't really think there's anyone else who could meaningfully be a champion that we would care about, because it's never going to be like the concept of champions was never going to be decided by a sword fight. And so whomever is chosen as the champion, them being the champion ideally is going to be interesting in and of itself. And I think that choosing Gavinor as the champion does accomplish that, like it, and doing it in the way that Brandon did it, I think is like milking as much like potential out of this setup as you could, where like choosing someone like, I don't know, Moash or whoever to be the champion instead would have led to less potential stories in the future, I think.
I do. So this is another one of Brandon's comments that I kind of like don't quite agree with on one or two things. And the first being, I don't think that the issue is that people, well, I guess the first thing is I don't think that it was foreshadowed very well. I don't want to like get too deep into like the I don't know, book reactions with Gavinor, I guess, but
I mean, you weren't on the reactions episode, Joff. You can,
So
you know.
Gavinor didn't exist as a character until Oathbringer, where he does basically nothing. And
Well, not
most
baby.
people most readers probably didn't realize like that Gavinor existed until that point. And then in Rhythm of War, like he's in like 2 meaningful scenes with Dalinar, and then he's in a lot of this book, but I just like never get a sense that like Gavinor like cares about this kid, or I don't know. I just don't think that he's set up to be the champion very well. And that goes maybe it like flies in the face of the fact that people have been predicting this for years, but I feel like the prediction is just because of like the one
Death Rattle.
Death Rattle, right?
Yeah.
And we've had 15 years to like sit here and theorize about it. Like, of course, like we threw enough,
We looked at every baby. And every
Yeah, you
child
needed someone
character.
to put in
How many babies
shaped
in this
hole.
book?
There's only so many
Orden
babies
champion.
in Tormund.
But I do think you're right there with that. Like,
Yes.
even if it's foreshadowed, like he's mostly in just this book. I do think if he switched it, it would be even more of an ass pull than Gavinor kind of is. But like, I feel like Gavinor needed a bit more setup, and I do think that's fair.
Yeah, like I'm
Yeah,
not saying
for
obviously
sure.
there's not like someone who's better foreshadowed because obviously this was his plan,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I wish there was like much stronger foreshadowing for it, even despite the community like having predicted it. The second thing I want to say is that I don't think that people being aware of this idea is like what makes them not like it. Partly that's just my own personal like gut opinion on it, because there's things that Brandon does tease, like Kaladin was Shardplate. Everybody knew Kaladin was going to get Shardplate at the end of Rhythm of War, but it was a great scene that we all loved. And I don't think that's the issue with Gavinor. I also have like my survey data. I specifically asked people, were you aware of this theory and do you like it? With Gavinor, the opinions were pretty divided. The people who said they were aware of the theory ahead of time did tend to dislike how it played out in the book. However, I also asked about the Chana is Shallan's mom. And that one, like the people who were aware versus that were not aware had pretty like similar opinions. So it's just like, to me, goes to say that like fans who are digging into this, that are aware of these theories ahead of time, doesn't like being aware of it doesn't mean you're not going to like how it plays out.
So tailing on that, I think I'm going to jump in with the phrase here of a journey before destination kind of deal is it's not necessarily guessing the theory ahead. Is it satisfying how you get there? And I know for me, it had nothing to do, I think, with the fact that the fandom had guessed the theory ahead of time. It was really more the fact that you think Gavinor is safe because Navani takes him out. And then to kind of have that switch at the end is the piece that was a little harder for me, and not knowing the theory ahead of time.
Oh, I liked that. That was good.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the execution within, like, if, as Joff pointed out, there's like not, unless he wants to do some rewrites for Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, there's not much you can do to strengthen the foreshadowing there. But I do think that there's like probably execution wise. I mean, Brandon has said that he took shots at the ending of this book several times and had to, do a lot of rewriting just to get this in. And, we know that there was a lot of time crunch just in the book in general. So I'm sure that with more time, there are more things that could have been added and weaved into preceding chapters to like maybe, take out this idea that Gavinor is replaced with a meat puppet that Navani, doesn't recognize and stuff like that.
I disagree that that's bad. I like it. That's good stuff right there. That's the kind of fake out I like.
Interesting.
He was safe. I thought he was okay.
Yeah, well, we don't have to get into all of it, but I wonder if part of it is like in earlier books, Brandon was like, okay, maybe I don't want to like have it be too heavily foreshadowed, right? Like he's trying to be like really careful. Whereas I think for a lot of people, I think if Gavinor just had more time on screen in character development, I think that would have probably worked better, even if this book is exactly the same, honestly. Like, I think that's probably an aspect. But, comments are all over the place with this book, guys. Like, YouTube comments are like, this book is terrible. YouTube comments are like, this book is amazing, and always for different reasons. Every single time. It's wild. So if you liked the thing, that's awesome. If you didn't like a thing, that's also fine. The book's all over the place.
That wasn't
so fun to talk about.
Yeah. That was an interesting thing from like my survey, like asking about how people like rate the 5 books. And Wind and Truth is by far the most, like the curve on like people liking it is like very flat. Like there's people who really dislike it and there's people who really like it, and everything
so it's
in the
like
middle.
Uniform rather than like bimodal. Okay.
Like Words of Radiance, not like it's a sharp curve, skewed towards 90%, right?
Sure.
But, you could tell me the math, the right math terms, but the curve for Wind and Truth is very
skewed left
broad.
Is what you probably want. Yeah.
So even like Rhythm of War is kind of like skewed lower than a lot of the other ones. Like the peak of Rhythm of War opinions is low, but the Wind and Truth, like there's people who like it more, and there's a lot of people who like it less, and it puts like the average a little bit lower down. So I don't know, it's just an interesting distinct difference between all the other books.
Yeah, and I think the thing of like people liking different things is one thing that Brandon talks a lot about in his writing lectures of like, you can't make everybody happy with everything. If a scene is enough of a standout that one person or a couple of people can love it, then it doesn't mean that it has to make everybody happy. But there's some people that love it. I mean, that's the definition of what Wind and Truth is. Like, people like it for lots of different reasons. And people have very mixed opinions on it for lots of different reasons. Like, I was one of those people that hated the baby champ theory, like when it was going around before.
Yeah.
And in execution, I find I have very mixed feelings on it. I like the decision to like age up Gavinor, but I also feel what Bonnie said of like, oh, I thought he was safe for a while. And I like the potential it has, but we also haven't realized that potential because we have to wait for Stormlight 6 and the time gap and all those things. And so I'm like all over the place on how I feel about this. And I think that's how most of the fandom is, as like the survey showed.
I think
And I'm so interested to see like how this plays out once we get to book 6 and people can go right from 5 to 6. Like, what is that going to look like? You know, it's going to be just a completely different perspective for people.
Yeah. Being able to just go straight to book 6 is like, that's just such a different feel from where we are right now. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly. So I'm really excited to see that.
One sort of thing that like Brandon also talked about in our interview, because we got into a bit of this, and we'll talk about that more, of course, is Brandon, you know, kind of stuck to his guns in many ways. And I think there was a YouTube comment saying like, yeah, I would rather authors make, you know, a risky choice, right? Like Brandon's trying to do these things where it's like you're trying to feel uncomfortable, and probably like any one of these single decisions, someone's like, I didn't really like that. Or I didn't really like that. And Brandon's like, yeah, but it's supposed to be the confluence of all of those, right? I don't know. I'd certainly rather him do big swings. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Maybe in the context of everything, it'll feel really good. We'll see what it's like. But I don't want people to just make the same safe choices. Like, I think just having Kaladin, Swear, and Ideal save the day, like it was really good. Like the Words of Radiance and Oathbringer are probably my favorite books, straight up, right? But you can't do it for 10 books, right? You just can't.
Boyd's monologue at the end of Oathbringer is a really great commentary on kind of Arch trying to do too many things, or trying to not being able to, I guess, be, you know, the best thing for all people.
Boyd's monologues are just Brandon's artsy English major BS, just like every time.
I love it.
I'm so here for it.
Like, I think that on a wider like publishing landscape, it's also interesting to see people take swings, especially because we're seeing so many like safe choices, because that's what makes money and because the publishing industry is messed up. But I think it's really interesting to have people like do risky things, and we don't know if it'll pay off, like Brandon said, until we get to Stormlight 6 and we see like what kind of reaction that book has. It's a really long waiting game, but I feel like if it works, it's going to work better than like just the safe choice.
Yeah.
And you're seeing that all over publishing, with people chasing trends and the romantasy boom and just things. I mean, the peaks of popularity of things, that's fine, but the things that really last are not always the ones that are chasing trends, but the ones that are innovating and doing something different and changing what it means for the genre in like the long-term future.
And this book might not do that, to be clear, but I'd rather like Brandon like make swings, right?
Have the possibility.
And like if Brandon's like, yeah, I want to do some different things because I feel that that's right. I think there's also YouTube commenters who's like, the beta readers are watering down Brandon's vision. No, absolutely not. Brandon is like, no, I'm going to do the big swings. That is what I'm doing.
I appreciate him pointing out the you know, people were controversy about Gavinor. The beta readers dislike this too. So it's like,
it was very funny, the draft we had. I think almost everyone hated it, the draft we had. I think I was the only one who liked it. I think I went through when that was revealed. I think I was the single person who liked it, actually, in the beta. But the beta was different.
So going on from that whole Gav debate, CS Potts says, I struggled with the Dalinar decision. I think he ultimately found the second best path that I wasn't expecting. I liked it. But I still think the best path was killing Gavinor. We know that Dalinar, despite his growth, can make hard decisions, and the decision to kill Gavinor felt like a very easy one in the wider scheme of things. Huge amounts of personal guilt for sure, but also the greater good argument was very strong. Why didn't he ever really seem to consider it? And Brandon says, I would argue he did consider it for a long time. You can see, if you want, the conversation with No Hat on as him manifesting a way to argue against himself. He very seriously did consider it, and I think that you have a very valid argument. Killing Gav makes a ton of sense, for the same reason as dropping the bomb on Japan made sense. But was it the decision that Dalinar would make? The argument against Journey Before Destination is that it is very short-sighted, that it fails to plan for the eventual destination that will come. Dalinar manifests this in his decision, and you have a very real argument against the philosophy of the Knights Radiant as he sees it here.
Ooh, I know Josh and Bonnie have thoughts on this. I know for a fact. Maybe others do as well, but I know you two definitely do.
Always.
Like Kelly brings the I guess the radiant philosophies into it because that's an interesting like aspect of it. Yeah, what are my thoughts on so like part of my I do think that Dalinar considered it. I think that my problem maybe with this is that I never really believed that he would go through with killing Gavinor. Like I guess as soon as Dalinar was like, wait a second, I don't know if I can kill him. Like I feel like I knew like at that point on, he's not going to kill Gavinor. Like he's not going to sit here and think about it and then be like, oh, I guess I got to kill him. So maybe that's like what this person is getting at. I just like hate the whole, I feel like Brandon is like very proud of this like challenge that he puts in front of Dalinar, and I just don't buy it. And I think it's because of like the foreshadowing issue that I have with Gavinor. Like I wish that I felt Dalinar's care for this child, because it feels like just well, you're my grandson sort of, so I have to kill, like I have to love you. I don't feel like Dalinar like really genuinely deeply from the bottom of his soul would save this child at the cost of everything else.
Yeah, like imagine if it was like Dalinar needing to kill Adolin. It's like we would feel that as a reader, right?
Yes.
I'm not saying that should have been the book, but like just there would be a very different emotional impact to that, right?
I as the reader would like understand that, and I would sympathize with that more than I sympathize with his struggle over killing Gavinor. And the other part of it is like, I don't know, like it just seems like an obvious choice to like, if there's not a third decision, if there's no other way out, if you have to kill Gavinor or not, or you have to die, like it feels like that's the right decision to me. And I just struggle to understand, like, even if he did love him, it doesn't feel like a very interesting problem. Like, sure, like you're going to do with tears in your eyes, it's going to hurt. It's going to like be a terrible thing. Maybe even it's like this moral thing you're going to struggle with for, forever. But it's like objectively, it seems like this is the thing you have to do. This kid went to Odium and said, I'm going to be your champion. He's the one that put you in this position. He's the one that put himself and the world in this position. Like he made this sucky, not like that's the problem. So that also like factors into like me having a hard time having sympathy about it. And then the last thing would be, this all gets kind of undermined by the story where like the outcome of the contest doesn't matter. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Like, I'm glad that it's more interesting than just option A or B. But I think that the fact that Dalinar realizes like win or lose, we all lose here. Like, this is not great. Either outcome is not great. And so that just like, to me, further like undermine, like I feel like I keep calling Brandon Dalinar. I don't know what that says about.
Well, they're both non-Smiths, Brandon,
I feel like Brandon like set this thing up that he wanted to be an interesting moral quandary, but then like the fact that the outcome of it doesn't matter also makes me as the reader have a hard time being invested in what the decision is, because I know that the decision doesn't really matter. That's my rant.
Yeah.
By the way, I ranked this book 4 out of 5 stars. Like, I mostly like the
this guys, I've listened to this Joff rant for a long time. I've wanted to get Joff on the show to have him share some thoughts for a long time.
We're gonna get so many comments about this.
That's fine. No, there's plenty. Hey, look, there's plenty of people who do not like Gav as champion for a variety of reasons, and I'm sure if that was you, maybe Joff just described some of those, and that's perfectly fine. I have no issue with people loving the book and disliking things we said or otherwise. Just be nice about it, and taste differs. That's all. That's fine. That's easy.
I don't disagree with Brandon. I do think that he did consider it in this. I just don't think it's a very interesting story for me.
No, you just don't like the trolley problem as this being a problem.
Yeah. Dalinar did consider killing Gavinor, but it's just not a story that I was particularly invested in. If it were Adolin, if it were somebody that there's a version of this where I did care. If I went into this caring about Gavilar, goodness gracious, Gavinor, and his relationship with Dalinar and all these things, if the decision mattered in some more meaningful way, I think I would be a way more emotionally invested in this section of the book. But as I was reading, I was just okay, whatever, kill him or don't. Let's just move on to let's please advance this plot to option C where that's actually going to be interesting.
Mm-hmm. I really like this one from a writing perspective, actually, just from the angle of how it's set up. Number one, pointing out, I am a sucker for not option 1 or 2, but come up with option 3. I love when you have that false dichotomy of options and you have to kind of find a way around it. And especially how this one is foreshadowed with the Sunmaker's Gambit. Where it's just toss everything, get everybody else in, you lose, but you're taking the other person down with you. I like that combination. I think that setup was really cool. In terms of the emotional connection, I definitely agree with what you're saying, Joff, with how Gavinor and Dalinar didn't feel as connected. It didn't feel as difficult for a decision for Dalinar. It's this or the world falls apart. That said, though, the setup of it, the writing, the Sunmaker's Gambit, the toss the cards off the table, I just thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, and I do like where the path Dalinar chooses in the end. I just didn't like this. I feel like Gavinor is supposed to be this dramatic, lead up to it, and instead it was a speed bump.
And I think going back to the specific line, the argument against journey before destination is that it's short-sighted, that it fails to plan for the eventual destination that will come. I mean, that's a valid criticism. That is a valid criticism of that way of looking at things. And I like how Dalinar not only did he choose neither of the options from Odium, but he didn't choose journey or destination. He chose both in that. He chose both journey and destination.
Hold up, Bonnie. I remember when the book came out that you were you didn't like that this was undermining the basis for the Knights Radiant. I distinctly remember this. What is happening?
Okay. I did have strong opinions on this.
Yeah, you did.
I think, okay, so if we're gonna go back to that is almost a different conversation, but I'm here for it. Basically, the idea that the entire theme of the book the series up until this book is this combination of having these odes from honor that help you grow, like cultivation. This was a big theme for me. And so this book just kind of completely threw that theme out, which sometimes is okay. But it definitely goes back on something that we've had this whole time. Just life before death, strength before weakness. This is a piece of growth. This is a positive thing. And so this book kind of reframes these odes that we've seen as very positive as potentially a negative thing that even keeps people from growing. And so for me, that was a bit of a struggle because the odes had always been a path to growth. And so reframing it as a path preventing growth was a difficult transition and how we looked at it.
You don't like that the bonds restrict things?
Yeah, it's interesting because it does do both. The bonds both are there as a framework for growth. It's something that you can grow, that you can build on, but it is something in a way that can also keep you from growing in different ways sometimes.
Like a trestle in a fence or something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Sunlit Man has some good commentary on this too. Like, I haven't had a chance yet to reread Sunlit Man and kind of think about it with the context of this stuff from Wind and Truth. But I like that Brandon's getting into exploring this aspect of the oaths.
One of my favorite bits from Sunlit Man was actually, are we going into Sunlit spoilers here?
Oh, it's Cosmere stuff. I'm fine. Yeah.
When Sig pulls out the card and he says, I have a card that says I don't have to do what you say. I thought that was fantastic. And what a way to get around it too, with having, I need to follow the rules. Well, here's a card that says you don't have to follow the rules. I like that. It's a way to get around that whole feeling the need to be the rule follower is, well, this card says I don't have to. Does anything change? Like, nothing changes because of this card. And yet your entire perspective on it changes because now you have this new card rule that says, nope, it's fine.
Yeah, I think that, like, I agree that the end state that we reached was, I think, is satisfying and lends itself to interesting directions to go. But I do agree that I wish that there was some way that we could have reframed I mean, obviously, if we take at face value that Dalinar actually does like Avnor, what happens to him is, something that would be a very emotionally negative thing for Dalinar to see. But I do agree that I wish that it could have the sort of wider conflict that Dalinar was seeing or experiencing at that point was like, how do I somehow introducing the idea that no matter, like, if Dalinar went into the contest knowing whomever dies, whichever champion dies, like, ultimately for everyone else, it's not going to be good. And so he's like racing to try and figure out how to avoid either of those things happening. Like, I guess it would be something that would have to be introduced in the spiritual realm of, like, and I mean, I guess it kind of is, because if he, that what he sees happen in the past is what allows him to sort of be in the right mindset to pull off the gambit and everything. But I wish that was sort of more front and center with this, like, and like, as he was like walking up the stairs or something, he was like, he knew in his, like, he was like frantically trying to figure out how he would avoid, even before he knew who the champion was, he would knew that he had to avoid killing them. Because I feel like I agree that it's sort of like the contest, especially in hindsight, definitely just seems like the easiest way to set up a trolley problem that we could then shove a baby into on one side and Dalinar on the other.
Yes.
And so if somehow that was reframed by Dalinar recognizing that no matter which way he sends the trolley down is going to be bad. But
I think it's really interesting too. It really, that scene, that conundrum points out the difference in thinking between Dalinar and Taravangian, where Taravangian's philosophy is, I have to do something negative to have a good outcome. Somebody has to lose for someone else to win. And Dalinar says, no, there's another way to do this. It's not just, we put the patients in the hospital and get the death rattles out of them. There are other ways to have positive outcomes.
Yeah, the trolley problem is not really the interesting part. The interesting part is Dalinar and Taravangian's moral conflict, which the book set up amazingly. For sure.
And I think the trolley problem really describes Taravangian's mindset very well.
Taravangian would set up a trolley problem. That makes perfect sense to me.
He's kind of like, I think that he's similar to, since we're going just full Cosmere stuff, I think that Taravangian is similar to Kelsier in that they're both the kind of people who would secretly relish the idea of flipping the switch in the trolley problem.
I don't know if they'd relish it.
Yeah.
I don't know about that, but I
can see it.
They would make the choice. They would be like, yeah, it's necessary. Yeah. I'm going to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that they both enjoy the idea of I don't know. There's this concept that I've read about of like there being in like some cultures, there's this idea of like having someone who's like a sin eater, someone who like ritually takes on like the sin of others to like absolve them.
Yes.
And so I think that
yes,
both Teravagen and Kelsier are like that. I think with different like nuances to it. But I think that it does. I do agree that this is the kind of thing that I think Teravagen would jump to and sort of be excited about having the opportunity to do this kind of thing.
That I agree with. Yeah.
They like being the guy that makes the hard decision.
Yeah. They're like, oh, the other people can't make the hard decision. Well, I don't have any problem with it. I'll make the hard choice. Yeah. Our next little topic, which is going to be shorter, is definitely a thing that I hear about in the reviews and the comments for sure. I know this one is Murphy Napier's problem with the book. So Adam, why don't you do this one?
So this next comment is a response to something that's unrelated to what we were previously discussing. So the initial comment from a user was, I noticed that several characters seemed far more introspective and self-aware in Wind and Truth than previous books, which led to a bit of tell don't show on how they're feeling and processing emotions. I've been really curious since reading the book about whether that's a pacing/word efficiency choice, or is it more about showing the growing emotional maturity of the characters, or was there something else you were looking for? I felt a similar shift in The Lost Metal, but I haven't been able to put my finger on what I think is going on. And then Brandon responds, hard to say on this one. I've always enjoyed a good navel gaze scene, perhaps too much. There's a ton of them in Elantris and Warbreaker. Might be me trying to do better processing character emotions. They might just stand out more here because of the way I'm jerking you between violent action scenes and more contemplative scenes to try and help to get a sense of discordance.
I do not think that is the problem that I see in the YouTube
That's not the
comments.
problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or at least
I can see it.
that may be part of it, but that's at least not the thing that people are voicing.
That's not what the self-awareness that people are voicing means. I don't think it's the jerking thing or just being too navel-gazy. I think part of it is that modern language
We'll talk
is
about
compounding on this.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because it sounds much more like the way we talk about mental health in like the current like landscape.
Mm-hmm.
And so like repeating like the way we phrase things and seeing that in the books feels a little bit like off-putting. And so it feels like much more noticeable because it's phrased the way we would like right now when we're talking about mental health or therapy and things like that. It feels so modern that it stands out. And so you notice these scenes more, even if they've always kind of been there because Brandon does like reflection and navel gazing. I think that's one of the reasons why.
So the reason why I can see this as being true is because if you have one scene that's going for a longer period of time and you stick a little navel gazing in the middle, it's easier to read through that pretty quickly and to miss that navel gazing. Whereas if the scene's broken up, you're going to notice that navel gazing more, I think, than maybe you would.
I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to describe Murphy's issue super great because I did not re-listen to it before recording this, and it's June now, which I hate. That it just seemed like there just wasn't like a lot of subtext. It's just like, yeah, this is what I'm thinking, and then I said the thing that I was thinking, and it's just there wasn't a lot of nuance there, whereas other books would have more of that.
I think Brandon is usually like this. Brandon is not usually subtle in this way. I think that a lot of times Brandon is pretty plain with like how he approaches kind of breaking into, I guess, the character's internal thoughts about the world and themselves. So it doesn't strike me as like out of character. I think that's possible he might be doing a lot more of that in Wind and Truth than usual. I do think that there's been maybe a trend in Brandon's writing towards doing more of this slowly. And when you've got big, 3 to 4 year gaps between Stormlight books, that's probably a little bit more noticeable from one to the next. So I think it's maybe a little bit of a shift, but also not something that surprises me from Brandon. It doesn't bother me too much, but I understand why it bothers people. And I do suspect, like Veronica said, that the main reason is the language used in those scenes, and less like the way that he's doing that in and of itself. Regarding, I guess, just this concept of telling and showing in general, the best example that I've seen about this in Wind and Truth that I saw someone point out was Kaladin's opening chapter is like, if you go read his chapter, like with this issue in mind, it's kind of amusing, like how many times Brandon repeats that Kaladin is feeling good. Like the opening words of the book are, Kaladin felt good. And it goes on like a whole paragraph like about how this is how good Kaladin feels. And then he still shows up and they talk about how good he feels. And he goes in the next room and his mom's like, wow, you've got a good attitude today. And like, it's just like, it beats you over the head with like how good Kaladin is feeling. And so it's something that I tend to, I think, read over. But I can understand why people get frustrated with it. It might also be like the length of the book and like the intensity of the book. Like we're here doing the climax of 5 books, and it might be a little bit of like, I get it. Like, let's get to the point of like this climax, and I don't care about taking extra words to like dig into what they're thinking about themselves.
That's such an interesting example, because thinking back to that scene, that absolutely makes sense. On the other hand, I can see why Brandon put it in the book, because we're really juxtaposing to just how awful Kaladin was at the end of Rhythm of War, right? And so we're trying to show that change and set up what he is doing in this book. So I think that's a fair critique, Like if that's a thing you don't like, that makes sense to me for sure.
I think in that specific example with the beginning of chapter 1, that's sort of the fact that it is that juxtaposition to the end of Rhythm of War sort of makes that part worse for me, just because it is such a drastic change.
Sure.
And I think that having a lot of that sort of be reinforced by like God voice narrator, like sort of exacerbates it for me. Where if it was just like him, talking, like if it was that information was just given to the reader through dialogue, I think it would have been a bit less, for me at least. I mean, like basically every character that I think you could apply this like critique of, they're telling not showing, I think every character in the book that you could apply that to has a like spren that they can always talk to externalize their internal thoughts. Or if like you're Seth and your spren is useless, he at least has Kaladin you can talk to.
Hey, sometimes Seth can sometimes talk to Sel.
Yeah, and so I think that it's sort of like, especially with the length of the book, it just feels like a lot of times it's like reinforcing something that either doesn't need to be reinforced or could be externalized to some conversation with some other character.
I think that's fair. I think Brandon's just like trying to like do the mental health well, and maybe he's like
overcompensating,
maybe, or just like he's so focused on that he's like, yeah, this is how I wanted to do it, but then that's introducing other issues.
These books are about like these characters having like personal like growth, and not just general character growth, but like, in terms of like their mental health and like all these things. Like these books are about these characters developing positively in those ways. And so I think that like to some extent this is just like the natural progression of especially Kaladin and Shallan. Like they've reached this point in their development where they're sort of more aware of what their problems are. Like they have had specifically sworn several ideals, digging through their trauma and their issues, and now they've reached this point where they are more self-aware and more aware of what their issues are. And so to some extent, like that's just where they are at. I think that it is like it's natural for them to be more aware of their issues.
Yeah, I am curious how it's going to go in the back half, because if you start thinking about like who our characters are, they've already sworn ideals. Like we're starting with Kaladin and Shallan kind of like at 0.
Yeah.
Well, with all the caveats that it entails, but I'm not going to get into that.
Well,
but like Lift has already sworn 3 ideals. Renarin has as well. And then let's not even get into the mess of the heralds. And then Jasnah is already like, I'm
Way high up.
literally surprised that she isn't at the 5th ideal already. And it makes sense considering, like, I mean, the whole Jasnah thing in this book.
Yeah.
But you'd expect her, especially through the course of those other 4 books before we get to hers. So I am curious how this is going to show up in the future, because Brandon is going to have to be able to like balance those things.
I think it's interesting
Big open
too,
question.
because Brandon had talked about in an earlier comment we read the different roles for the characters too, how they have different roles in this book. And usually Kaladin is the one who's the fighty character.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, he's a little more of that navel-gazy character. And maybe that's some of it too, is we're seeing characters doing different things than they usually do.
That like readers aren't used to Kaladin navel gazing and
Exactly.
Yeah, and this is not to say that if you're like, I don't think this book is well written, that you don't have a point, right?
We're certainly not used to Shallan being aware of her issues, so that's I don't know, a pretty drastic change.
Yeah. Ooh, and so this next topic also very much talks about prose and language issues. That it comes up a lot. Why don't you take this one, Bonnie?
All right. So I personally have no qualms with the modern writing style you went for in this book. It makes your work so accessible and readable. However, the MCU style quips did hamper the reading experience a bit. Was this something your beta readers pointed out? And then another comment, Brandon has been having quips since the beginning of his time as an author, though. I feel like people that compare everything to the MCU are the actual brain-poisoned people, not the various authors that now get this insane critique lobbed at them because it's not just Brandon dealing with it. And so Brandon responds, I wouldn't call people brain-poisoned for this. Warning, long dissection next. I'd say that this type of humor, which is very much a Gen X style, was overplayed by the people in charge of Star Wars and the MCU, using the humor in bad ways, which has made the entire humor style feel less sincere than it once did. When it worked, the goal was to humanize characters and make the world seem more real, more everyday life. That was the goal, for example, Buffy itself, to take fantastic out-of-this-world situations reserved for action stars and put normal people in those situations. The quips, then, don't break the fourth wall, but help to make people seem real. There's a few examples in here, just talking about puny God and Loki, Poe making a your mom joke, but then continuing on. I think what's happening here personally is that readers want sincerity from their stories. There's this growing sense in cinema that we can't take anything seriously because otherwise we'll be nerds. And only nerds would like this unironically. So everything has to be ironic and making fun of itself. They long for, say, the sincerity of the Lord of the Rings films. Stories that say, we're not ashamed of the drama, power, and beauty of a fantasy sci-fi story that takes itself seriously. Andor and Dune are beloved for these very reasons. Anyway, I feel that audiences are associating this humor with insincerity more and more, so they're rightly sensitive to them.
Brandon has always kept things in the book that make him laugh and that he finds funny that are divisive. And that has been very consistent across this and is not an issue of just this book. I think that's a Brandon issue overall. And that is totally fine if you don't like it. I do think there were quite a lot of quippy lines in this one, like making it feel maybe that Avengers style, like, you know, it's a bit quippy, you know.
They jumped on like comparing it to MCU, and I think it's deeper than that. It's not like he's imitating what the MCU is doing, but I think Brandon describes it really well here, of this like style of humor that has maybe gotten to be associated with something less sincere. I think on top of what he was saying, I think that this type of humor also serves to sort of it subverts expectations a little bit, I think, with this kind of humor. A lot of times when someone comes in with this kind of quippy line that you weren't quite expecting, but I think it's been done so much now that we start to expect it. And I think he hits the nail on the head that it has this sense of insincerity to it compared to, I mean, his examples of things like Andor and Dune, Lord of the Rings as like are very sincere stories. And
even though Andor does have laugh out loud moments, like with B2 constantly cracking me up. I watched it last week. Hey, but it's overall a very sincere story.
Yeah, and he points out himself, like Lord of the Rings has some Gimli and Legolas quipping. Like there's all these stories have like a little bit of that kind of, you know, goofy humor in it. It's just about the balance and whether that humor is undercutting serious moments and serious character progression and so.
And he does have a really good example in here too with Deadpool, just talking about how it balances both the humor and the very serious moments. I know reading this, I'm usually in the group that likes the quippiness, but I did feel very seen with the story saying we're not ashamed of the drama, power, and beauty of a fantasy sci-fi story.
Yeah, and I think going back a long, long time, you don't need to go back far to see people complaining about Shallan's quippiness, even in 2010. Like that's just a fact.
It's been there. That's
and Wayne for a very long time.
Maybe one of the things that happened with this book is that before it was kind of contained to these characters, to Shallan, to Wayne, to Lift, to Lopen, and now it's a little bit more spread out from people you wouldn't expect it as much. I mean, Kaladin, there was a Sigil comment that I remember some people saying that felt very modern and like kind of like the style that taken straight out of from like our world. And so I think it might be that in part that we're seeing it from people we're not used to seeing it from, instead of just like these characters that are kind of known for that and that have had this kind of quippy characteristic since they first showed up.
I can't quite put my finger on what line I'm thinking of, but I feel like there's a moment or two where Zeth has like a line, right? And Zeth's always been this very, distant, serious figure. So,
but like I can still like see we're trying to crack that shell open, right? And like I think there was a line that Zeth really made me laugh, and that was really good, actually. I think, let's be honest, I think the one that people mention the most is I'm his therapist. And so, Bonnie, why don't you read this last part here?
Yes.
They did complain about therapists. I kept it because at the end of the day, I get to keep a joke now and then that makes me smile, even if I know some won't laugh. Remember, in my books, I have to try a variety of different kinds of humor, because what some people cringe at, others laugh at, and vice versa. I loved that Kaladin, here at this moment of climax, was still baffled by Hoyd. And as I said, this is a genre of humor from my youth that is still powerful for me. From boring conversation anyway, to he's adopted. Lines like this really work for me if not overused. But I can see that the current environment of storytelling has made them stand out more. And I feel more hand of the author than they once were, which in turn kicks people out, which is something you really want to avoid as an author. At the end of the day, I'd have kept that one, but I'd probably have been a little more careful about other modern language uses so that I could keep the ones I really love without kicking people out so often.
Yeah, because there's a lot of people just like the word choices feel more modern, like dating versus courting. Some other examples I have not found to be as compelling, like with people saying, I think, where Oathbringer actually had more instances of it, but I think it's overall the feel of it rather than any particular word choice. And so we don't need to get caught up in like the specific details of that, but it's the overall feel, I think.
I think that's why it's really hard to like give for people who don't sense it and get frustrated by this. It's hard to give examples to explain because it's less like specific examples and more like this, teeny tiny, micro examples, all through the 1700 pages of the book.
Yeah. Now, I will say, as a beta reader, in every beta read, I think there's people complaining about every quip. Just, namely, I hated the pattern making like an irrational number joke. I hate that quip. I think it is really dumb and I hate it. But trust me, a lot of people did not like that. I'm a therapist one. just like a lot of people, I expected this. I think it's funny. I can see why you wouldn't find that funny. That's perfectly fine. But overall, for like the modern language, the beta process is actually pretty bad at like being able to deal with those issues, I think. Because the thing you have to understand is that like the beta like just has spelling errors and like just a lot of errors all over the place. So you're not supposed to comment on the line issues. That's the whole point, because Brandon's going to do another draft and fix a lot of the language issues. And like he's going to do a 10% cut. And I've known this with a few beta readers who like this has happened with Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, where betas are like, oh, the beta draft didn't really feel like a Brandon book because it didn't have like that 10% cut and things that really like tightened up the language and things. And so after that draft, then it's all just like catching errors. So there's not necessarily a time where we can like look at the prose and see, it's like, should the prose be different? It's like, oh yeah, here is a typo. Here is a continuity error in that last draft, right? So
it's also kind of a global problem with it's hard to, when you're reading and thinking about, issues on like a line by line or chapter by chapter.
Yes.
Especially when you're getting the book in parts and you've read part 1 and then you're reading the end of the book 6 months later. It's hard to like see the whole picture and be like, okay, the language in this book needs to turn, you might have a line here and there. It's like, okay, whatever. It's, there. It takes a while before you get into the book, before you realize like, oh, this is actually a problem for me now.
Yeah, the beta was an 8-month process here, and we didn't get it in order. I mean, we kind of got it in order, but then Brandon's like, here's all the Adolin chapters for day 3 through 7. Just imagine where they are in the book. I'm like, okay, cool. So, it was tough. It's work.
And like you said, Joff, it's a compounding issue. It's not a thing of like one specific instance, unless it's something like very standout, like the therapist thing, because Kaladin himself was confused. I think people wouldn't. When Hoyd made the therapist joke and Kaladin asks, "What's a therapist?" Like people are like, "Okay, yeah, this is Hoyd, whatever." But when Kaladin says it stands out a lot. And so, unless it's something like that. If you're reading it out of order, if you're reading it over a huge amount of time, you forget about those things. I'm not a beta reader for Brandon's books, but I did beta read Eric's book.
That's
and
true,
Eric's book is like half the size of Wind and Truth. And we read it over months and months and
you forget
months.
a lot.
And there's things you forget a lot. Like we were chatting the other day with some of we were just chatting with people who just finished it. And Eric has remembers a ton of like details because he's the author of the book. But there were so many things that I had forgotten about that had happened, especially in the earlier like parts of the book. I was like, oh, I had forgotten about this detail and these things that you just can't do without a reread. And the beta, like from the way that it is described, like by the beta readers I know and what Eric just said, it just doesn't give you the chance for that. Because even rereads are for other purposes. You forget about those things.
Yeah, if you read Wind and Truth over 8 months, you probably won't notice those things as much, but maybe that will be frustrating in a very different way,
There's also like the fact that like there's a lot of stuff in these books, and it's hard to be like 100% thorough on what you think about every little thing. And so when it's something like, to my mind, like the language, I could comment on the language of in the book, and maybe I have like opinions about how it could be better, or that things I don't like, but like then I get to something like Gavinor that I have very strong opinions about. And I keep like there's only so much time you have to like be able to comment on so many things, and so it's hard to get every little thing.
Yeah, the discourse, you have infinite time to discuss the book forever and decide what you think. Maybe someday I'll get published and I'll sponsor a slot on Shardcast for all our sponsorships we do, and you'll see my book. But yeah, all the writing stuff are very interesting to me. Do you have any other like prose humor thoughts, guys?
So for me, the thing that I recognized was the lack of Rosharan terminology.
Okay.
Is really where it hit for me. Is usually in books, you run into phrases that someone might say in world, for example, just based on where they're coming from, what their experiences are. When we talk about courting versus dating, the way I'm looking at it is not necessarily dating as a modern term so much as we don't have that terminology of courting. It's the lack of that more kind of archaic linguistic choice, like you might see in Lord of the Rings, where it's very formal. In this book, it's a lot less formal. And so what I was picking up on, at least looking at it, is that it's that lack of formality as opposed to the presence of modernity, if that makes sense.
That is probably challenging because Brandon does try and not have it be so archaic, but at the same time, you do want to feel transported into another world so it doesn't feel like right now. So that I think that's probably the issue. Also with the therapy stuff, right? That it just feels too here. And
the therapy thing for me was very much a tonal issue, is that it's making a joke in the middle of a very serious scene.
Oh, you mean the I'm a therapist, I'm his therapist line?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I very much understand why people don't like that joke, though.
You do get the poop jokes in chapter 2, so it sets the tone early of like this. I don't know, vibes. The chol.
Yeah, chapter 11, everyone's favorite chapter. Hey, I thought it was fine when you read the whole book. It's just when you read the sample chapters. I think the beginning of this book is good. Dang it. I think it really holds up on a rewrite. But I'm a Wind and Truth apologist, guys.
Wow, what a shock.
I know. Now we're going to talk about something light that really, doesn't get a lot of discourse. It's about Jasnah and the Jasnah Debate. And so we actually cut out a thing earlier in Brandon's initial comment when he talks about Jasnah. And so we're just going to talk, the whole rest of the episode is just going to be about Jasnah. So great. Let's see how long this takes.
Warning.
See you in 2 hours. We'll find out. So Brandon, back in that initial post, he was saying how like he's confident that the child champion was the right decision to do. And then he says, still undecided on Jasnah. I took 3 stabs at that sequence with beta reader feedback, as it was very controversial there too. Yes. And still don't know if people are just unwilling to let Jasnah lose or if there was a better way to write the sequence. Probably a mix of both. Should have probably pushed harder that Jasnah is off-kilter because some of the things Taravangian is doing echo the terror she felt as a child, being unable to trust that her own conclusions in mind during a certain episode in her past will delve further into later.
Yeah,
that's a really interesting revelation because absolutely wasn't on my radar that Jasnah's past was involved in this.
Well, because there was that insanity bit, like, it's so slight here. I do think that would make the sequence better.
I can see how it relates.
I have strong feelings on that. Oh, go ahead.
I'm hesitant to say, like, yeah, you should have included this here, because for like this might be a thing that he was like saving for something in the back half, and if he pulled it up to here, then it's going to be like this, Vinley, flashback thing.
He's going to talk about exactly this in just a bit, so don't worry.
Right. But yeah, so I'm not sure about that, but yeah, I disagree quite strongly that it's about unwillingness to let Jasnah lose. Obviously, I don't know. I can speak for myself and what I've seen other people say. I feel like people are happy to see Jasnah lose. It just kind of, those of us who are frustrated by the debate, I think more from what I've seen have leaned more towards like just frustration with how it went, not with how she lost, not with the fact that she did lose.
The destination is good.
Yeah.
It
feels engineered to make her lose.
I'm glad she lost. Like, absolutely. Like, it was the right decision for this book, I think, for her to end on a losing note.
I can see in hindsight that it makes sense that Jasnah would be off kilter by the things Taravangian is doing. Kind of like thinking about like Gavinar's personality and how he was kind of like gaslighting and the way he treated her. Like, it makes sense in hindsight, like seeing this comment from Brandon of, oh, this is why she's off kilter. But I never felt that when I was reading this thing.
No,
Like I never
never.
made that connection when I was reading. I'm like, this is why Jasnah is off kilter.
No.
It makes sense if that's like Brandon's thought process, but it didn't show through at all. And I think that's the issue here.
Yeah. Let's continue because there's more. Striker Easy. Shout out to Striker. As someone who liked the Jasnah debate, I think the thing most people who dislike about it is that it feels like Jasnah failed too easily. Not that she failed at all. They think she should have realized that she's not this perfect, emotionless person, and does actually do things she thinks are best for her family way before the debate ever happened. It kind of feels like she had that realization already at the end of Oathbringer when she spares Renarin. Yes. Mm-hmm. That, plus a lot of people feel like Fen was out of character for that sequence. And Stryker says he can't do that argument justice. All right. So Brandon says, I'm aware of these arguments, as they were in the beta reads. Yes. I did take several stabs at Jasnah. I didn't change Fen. She's not out of character, in my opinion. She's a queen, presented with a terrible decision, and our familiarity with her and our fondness for the Cullen family has led us to ignore the signs that she would take this deal, which have been in the books from the start. I do also think people aren't realizing that Jasnah didn't learn her lesson at the end of Oathbringer. Not entirely. She's been sitting on a fence ever since that moment, refusing to completely jump into a new line of reasoning and philosophy. Because, like all people, she has momentum. And even for someone very self-reflective, change is difficult. However, I have deliberately not given myself the time to delve into this too much in the books, as I need to savor for back 5. Again, no dismissal of people's valid complaints about the book, just my take on it. This is dangerous to do, as the reception of the book is not mine to decide, but the fans. What a sweet guy, Brandon. That said, I don't want to imply that the reception to the book was bad, as it isn't. It's among my better reviewed books, but it certainly generated a lot of conversation on the subreddit and elsewhere. It might have the biggest gulf between general fan reaction and subreddit reaction of any book of mine. That's so interesting about Oathbringer, because I wonder if part of this is just because we're seeing so few POVs from Jasnah's perspective that it's like we're getting these tiny snippets, and this was not obvious to me, especially after I reread that decision in Oathbringer, because definitely my opinion is that, yeah, Jasnah, of course you deal with your fan. We already did this. What? This is not a surprise. So what are you talking about? But like, maybe it's just because Brandon's just being super coy and saving it for back half, and so that makes this plotline worse.
Yeah. One phrase that I have come to very much dislike, perhaps even odiously hate, one might say, is the anything that is ended with the phrase "in the back half" or "in the back 5," just because I feel like and I don't want anyone to think that this is like attacking people who are using that phrase or anything to in the context of their discussion of the book, but it's just, I feel like the book has to stand on its own. The front half, I think, needs to stand on its own, because there's years-long time skip that we're going to have to sit through with the book. And yes, once that's over, then there will no new reader will ever have to deal with the time skip. But at the same time, I think that, especially in this case, because as Brandon has, unless he decides to change something, which frankly I'd be happy to see him change this, but he said that Jasnah is going to be the book 10 focus character. So not only is it this, I'm sitting on this stuff for the back 5, he's sitting on this for another 5 books. And at least as far as we have seen, I don't think that there's like the risk reward of sitting on this stuff now so that in decades it will have some payoff. I don't think the payoff is going to be worth it compared to using this as a chance to add a few lines that expand on why she's feeling the way she's feeling, why she loses the debate the way she does, giving some more justification for that. I think that would have gone a long way towards assuaging a lot of people's issues with sort of the broad strokes of the debate. I think that there'd still probably be some issues that people would, have that would be valid. But I think that it's sort of emblematic of the idea that he has to sit on stuff for reveals in the future, whether it's he sat on stuff in previous books so that he could have reveals in this book, or he's sitting on stuff now so that he can have reveals in future books. I think that it is hurt more than it's helped for this type of thing where he's willfully holding on to stuff.
He made a bold decision as a writer to structure his books in a very specific way where he wants these flashbacks to happen and to be part of the integral structure of the series. And I think sometimes, like, there's things I really like about that, but sometimes he probably writes himself into a difficult place where, like, there's not a great solution if you want to hold on to that structure.
Yeah.
I think that with Jasnah, there was trying to think about it. And obviously I have no idea what this plot point in the back half is. Like, I'm not sure exactly what it is about. But from the little we know about her, especially from her prologue sequence in Words of Radiance, you can kind of see a little bit of like the vague shape of what it could be. Her relationship with Gavilar, the mention of that lunacy, and Amaram too, actually, the way she was constantly gassed up. Like, this is, and we see it in her character overall, like, this is the kind of woman you're supposed to be. This is the kind of princess you're supposed to be. These are the expectations we have for you. Particularly with Gavilar and the way he saw her as his daughter in a different way than he saw Elokar. So I think that when Taravantian starts going to similar strategies, like making her doubt herself, and the fact that she can think things through and be logical and be brilliant in her own way, and this identity that she's built up for herself after like that whole trauma, it's probably echoing to her as like similar to the things that Gavilar did. And obviously we don't know exactly what that lunacy was about, and I suspect that's what that incident that Brandon mentioned is going to be tied to.
Absolutely.
But we can see like the general characteristics of it, and so we could have like walked that line a little bit like closer, of tying it to the parts of Jasnah's character we've already seen, instead of fully saying, oh, we need to hold this back for the back half. We have enough of her character and of her backstory through that prologue scene, through the way she thinks about herself, through the way we've seen Gavilar talk about his kids throughout the entire prologue sequence. Even like outside of Words of Radiance, he's talked about how Elokar is a disappointment, and then Jasnah had her lunacy, like all these things. And we could have alluded to that and made the parallels clearer without having to explain the entirety of like, okay, what this lunacy is, what that specific incident was. Like, there was a way of walking the line a little bit closer, which would have made it clear without going to the and the back half, or having like what we did have.
I definitely think this is a challenge with Stormlight structure. This is going to be tricky. It's tricky with the book 10 character being with the cast so early. On one hand, I totally agree with you, Adam. Like, yes, the book needs to stand on its own. And if you feel it doesn't stand on its own because of that, I think that's totally fair. On the other hand, what if it's a thing that in book 10, we're going to get like the climax of that, and it's going to feel like an I Am Unity moment, which is like universally, like, maybe not universally, but like everyone talks about that as like one of their top moments in Stormlight, right? And so there is that careful balance, and we right now don't have that full picture. Like, this story is old, over 20 years old in Brandon's mind, right? Of just, no, this moment will be awesome. We just need to wait a really long time to get to it. And I'm sure there will be things when we're done with back half that we're going to be like, yeah, the structure had some pros, had some cons, right? And this might be one of those things. And maybe Brandon, could have written it better even not going into this stuff. But I don't know.
Yeah.
I think that's the challenge for Brandon as the artist, where he's like, if I give too much, it's not going to have the impact that I want. And I really want that later moment to have an impact, especially if it's the end of the entire series. But that does make this worse.
I one thing I would say in response to that is the I am Unity moment. Now, I don't know the specifics of what the original outline was, but we do know that Dalinar's stuff was moved from book 5 to book 3. And so you could say that, we got the I am Unity moment because Brandon was willing to break from his outline. So I think that breaking from his outline, I think, I'm sure that it is, there's some really juicy stuff down the road. But I think that he's also shown that breaking from that outline can lead to some really good stuff also.
Like with Adolin.
Yeah, like with Adolin, for sure.
I think even like the big picture outline aside, like it was a decision for Jasnah he needed her to have a loss in this book, but it didn't necessarily, as far as I know, like have to involve like this particular aspect of her character. So I'm speaking as someone who doesn't know the full picture of what Brandon has planned, I guess. But at the end of the day, it's kind of a choice he made as an author that this is the story that he wanted to tell, but it's also reasonable to be frustrated because she made a decision and had this problem without me as the reader having all the context to understand the problem. So it's a tricky thing. I'm actually not entirely sure I understand what the lesson in Oathbringer has to do with the debate. Like I understand how it connects to some degree, but it's like not associated with like my frustrations with the debate.
Okay. Look, Jess, love her to bits. She's told me I can explain this. So the whole ending is that the dramatic reveal in the debate is, oh no, I don't do what's best in general. I do what's best for, my family. And it's like, but we did do that. You specifically were like, hey, in Oathbringer, we have this whole thing where, most traitors come from within, and I need to kill Renarin, and then she doesn't do it. And it feels, I guess, from like Jess's perspective, it feels almost insulting to Jasnah's intelligence that she didn't think about this anymore. And we're going to get to a comment where Brandon talks more about that, but that's the relationship there that like, and I didn't pick up that on reading the book, but like I think it's more like when you zoom out, like what?
I think like my issue with it is like not just that, but the fact that it's like the measure of her response feels like I don't like she has this like crisis of faith, this like fundamental. It just doesn't feel like that fundamental to her philosophy. I guess like when I'm thinking about Renarin and her interactions with Renarin, it's there's an illogical I'm not going to kill him for irrational reasons that's involved there. But I guess at the end of the day, like it is a rational, but it was a very rational thing to do. She just didn't have all the information to base that decision on to not kill him. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
And so it just doesn't like necessarily feel like it's this like fundamental, like, oh my gosh, everything I know about the world is like no longer makes sense. Okay. She didn't have that when Renarin happened. So like, why is she having it now when it's like the same kind of, and I guess maybe the issue is she just didn't think about it all the way. I don't know.
We'll get you
being
on the future
that is
Jasnah Debate episode. Don't you worry. You guys can hash it out. I'm sure the YouTube comments will be super nice about it.
You just have to remember that it's not like Jasnah is the sole, like basically the sole relevant member of the order that is all about self-improvement and specific roads tailored to that. It's not like that.
I can see the comments now that I don't understand the Jasnah Debate. I get it, but
no. I think you do have a valid comment that like the Renarin thing wasn't like an earth-shattering thing from Jasnah's perspective. I think that's fair. I think it just leads to the aspect that why is this so earth-shattering now? It hit like a wet noodle to me. I'm like, okay. And like, I love I love the idea of Jasnah being crushed like a bug. I'm a big fan of that, actually. And utterly destroying characters. And I don't know, it didn't feel earned, right?
Yeah.
Like it's just
Yeah.
So
my issues with it was basically that, similar to Jess, I think that it felt like we got to the end of this debate and it just felt like her whole like worldview was like crushed, and it felt like the things being crushed were like not very complex philosophical concepts.
I definitely think talking about Jasnah being off kilter, that really recontextualized the scene. It really changes the read of the scene from Jasnah coming in ready, having researched, prepared to debate, and then struggling to debate things that seem pretty simple, which I know comes up later. And instead, it's Jasnah coming into a situation that is reminiscent of something that really was problematic for her in her childhood. That's a completely different scene to me. That's just a completely different scene. I think it's like Adam was saying this is book 5 right now. Is this going to pay off later? Maybe it is going to be much better later. Maybe it's going to work. Not knowing now and going back for a reread and thinking, oh my goodness, I didn't know she was going through this and remembering this event at this time. Like maybe it's going to be much better later. Maybe vice versa though. If this had been a very, if we knew she was off kilter here, if we knew she was uncomfortable, that's almost pulling us into like questioning and being more committed to her character. Like it builds that mystery and that suspense of what happened. Like what's going on that you're reacting this strongly to this event and drags you along to, eventually book 10 or whenever we get flashbacks.
I do think like what I see from a lot of people who like the Jasnah Tarvangian debate is a lot of things that people will point out is that it's part of the problem is that Jasnah goes in thinking she's having one debate and that's not what it is.
Sure.
And I think it plays well with what Brandon apparently was kind of trying to do here to some degree with like it not being about, making the right arguments or whatever, because it's about, these issues she has, in her own life with her own past and her own trauma and her own sort of misconceptions.
Yeah, I think that if it was played up just a bit, with that there were these past issues, it would have had a huge impact. And so I will have to. Let's talk in 25 years with book 5's book 10's done. I didn't do the math. It might be 20. Okay. Probably 25. Anyway, have fun with that, guys. We'll have a lot of gray hair by then.
How old am I going to be then?
Here's the thing about us not knowing that that's the reason why Jasnah was off kilter is that none of the betas could have caught it. Like we couldn't have known to suggest, hey, Brandon, maybe play it up a bit.
Beta readers are not there to suggest things,
guys.
though. They're not supposed to suggest
No, but
things.
I know, but like of getting that feeling across of
identifying what the problem is, you mean?
Of identifying what the problem is correctly. Yeah.
There was a lot of discourse about the Jasnah debate, so there was plenty of that.
Yeah, of course there was.
Like I think Brandon can see from the comments, like, oh, they're frustrated about these things. I think he probably was aware, oh, if I gave them this about her past, then that would fix these problems. He's just also trying to weigh that against saving it for later.
Yeah, because like he made like Jasnah really tired and things, and I'm like, yeah, okay, but I want to talk about the utilitarianism stuff. So there was another thing on Jasnah where someone asks, my personal issue with the debate is that all the arguments I saw were very common and easy to refute arguments against utilitarianism. It seemed very wrong that she wouldn't have encountered them before and known how to handle them. And I would say this is what Jess, David, Gray, and many others on our reactions episode said. Brandon, this is a perfectly valid complaint. If I were to rebut, it's to say this. They are common, but I don't think they're easy to refute. Rather, they are too easy to refute until they aren't. Let's look at myself with religion. I believe because of certain feelings and experiences I've had. The common refutation to this is, look, that's confirmation bias. And I recognize this. I look at it and weigh it and just have to say, yeah, I understand that, but I don't think this is confirmation bias. Likewise, Jasnah has looked at all these arguments and has had to say, at the end of the day, okay, those are logical complaints about it, but I still think this is the way to go. Because there is no right answer to these kinds of questions, and you have to pick one and go with it. But that can come crashing down around you, where you suddenly see everything in a new light, and the objection suddenly makes sense. It happens when someone has a crisis of faith, and similarly with a crisis of philosophical underpinnings. Sure, Jasnah could have made the knee-jerk canned responses, but in that moment she realized Teravangian was right. Suddenly the arguments don't work. I hold that Fenn's decision was the correct decision, and Jasnah, who's the closest character to me in the Stormlight books, absolutely knew it. That's interesting. Fenn should have taken that deal, and arguing against it was simply wrong because Jasnah knew she'd have taken the deal. Anyone should have in Fenn's position. That's where I think I disagree with the interpretations of the scene. I think Fenn should have taken the deal. Jasnah thought Fenn should have taken the deal. Because of this, Jasnah couldn't rely on her previous philosophical foundations. The fact that I didn't entirely get this across in the text to you, however, is not your fault, but mine. What a class act, Brandon. I could read Brandon talking about this stuff all day. It's interesting that Brandon's like, yeah, Jasnah's most like me here.
Yeah.
Personally, like, interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I don't know how much this... I don't know. I don't know how much I buy that that's what came across in the text, personally.
It's interesting that he ties the fact that Fenn isn't buying what, like, this whole... It's interesting how closely he ties the Fenn stuff to Jasnah breaking down. I mean, he's not saying that it's the sole reason that Jasnah sort of broke down and was sort of collapsed in the debate. But I always felt that when I first read it, I thought, yeah, it makes sense that there's nothing that Jasnah in that position could do to just rhetorically convince Fenn to not side with Odium, just based on the sort of material conditions of what she stood to lose and stood to gain and everything.
Yeah.
And similar to discussions we've already had, I guess, on this, it feels like there's a lot of sort of stuff that's like in Brandon's head leads to Jasnah acting in a certain way that just doesn't really seem to merit the level of reactions that she had. Like, I could see her recognizing that Fenn is not going to go on her side. I can understand that would, she would be put off by that, but I don't see it being on like the same order of magnitude as to what happened in the scene.
I think the thing I struggle with is like, Brandon actually kind of compares it to like his own religious beliefs. This might just be like my issue with like being able to like sympathize and understand Jasnah, but it's hard for me to like understand like, oh, I've got my moral philosophy, like my priorities are in a different order, it turns out, than what I thought they were. Does not feel like as an earth-shattering thing as, oh, my entire religion is not. It doesn't, like, it just feels like a very different magnitude of things. And Jasnah reacts like, oh my gosh, look, it turns out I worry about my family more than, my friends, and that more than my country. Like, she realizes her priorities are different than she thought. And like, she has this total like just a meltdown of I don't know. It's a very devastating thing for her to make that realization, and I don't understand that. It's hard for me to understand that.
That's such an interesting point, because I think, Brandon is thinking of this as like, what if you lost your faith?
And religion.
But like, I can somewhat see it, but I don't know. At least for me, as an atheist, I have opinions, but I don't like strongly hold to them. Like, they're not like these core convictions. And so if like someone shows that it's like, there's this problem with it, then it's like, okay, like I will adjust.
Change.
And whereas like if with like a crisis of faith, if your entire foundation is like in religion or a deity, and it comes crashing down. It's like, but the deity doesn't exist. Then yeah, that is shattering. But like, if you're not holding to that, it doesn't have to be shattering. So I don't know. Maybe this is where I can see what Brandon's saying, and I'm sure that can happen for some. And I still like how Jasnah ended up, but I wonder if it is just Brandon maybe not fundamentally understanding atheism because he is inherently religious. But, that's speculation. And I'm sure you can have, like, if you find the philosophy very important, things like that happening in a dramatic way. And it's kind of interesting that it's like, yeah, no, I was wrong. And in this case, I can't actually convince Fen. And I thought I could. And now, like, oh, this land went to Odium and everything's crashing around me. Like, so like there's elements to that work. But yeah, like philosophically, I'm like, I don't know. If there's a moral claim that it's like, oh yeah, no, I don't agree with that anymore. And I was like, okay, you just do that. It's pretty easy, actually. I think one thing a scientist said is like, hey, scientists have strong opinions held weakly. And that just means like, hey, if there's a new thing, I'll just change my mind. That's fine. But I might have a really strong opinion at the time.
It to some degree, like the realization that Jasnah has there is like, oh, I'm not as cold and calculating as I thought I was. And so maybe that's supposed to play into this, like this just matters to me more than like, I can't just accept this, but I don't understand the context for like why it is so devastating for her. That's my biggest issue with the whole debate. Like there's points in the debate along the way where I'm a little bit frustrated with how she responds, but my biggest issue was at the very end, how like it left her, it felt like a crisis of faith, and I don't sympathize with like understanding why she feels that way.
Mm-hmm. This is definitely one where I feel like I'm not going to be able to feel like I have a good, strong opinion on this until we have the context of where Jasnah is coming from. Like until we have a better understanding of her as a character and where she's coming from. I very well might not be a fan of it long term, or it might make perfect sense. And it's just hard to say without that background. And
to Adam's point, right? It's Brandon's choice to not give more of Jasnah's character, right? And so, like, if that's you and you're like, yeah, there's not enough foundation or Jasnah POVs to really feel the weight of that it's crashing down,
exactly.
Then it's Brandon's choice. That's later in the series, right? And that's an intentional choice he's making, right?
Yeah, because like I feel like with a crisis of faith, it's very easy to understand like where that conviction is coming from. And sure, everybody comes from like a different place of exactly why they believe what they believe. But we do have that big question of like, why is Jasnah so set on utilitarianism? And she's explained why she thinks it's the right philosophy to Shallan, but we don't understand why like that's what she landed on. I think that might be a little bit of what you were getting at, Bonnie, of we're still missing that context.
Part of it,
I'm not sure. Again, we can't. It's a question mark. We can't know for sure. But I think that might be part of the problem.
It's a whole big question mark for her history. It's hard to have the same emotional impact and connection when you don't have that history yet.
Yeah.
And it very well could read amazingly later on, but we just aren't there yet.
I also think that like utilitarianism as an idea is like this, it's this whole like branch of philosophical ideas, and I feel like the book treats it as like this one thing that she believes, when in reality it's like there's an infinite number of different like forms that utilitarianism can take. And I feel like the issue, it's not even like that she's like is like that utilitarianism is undermined in this, because part of the premise of the philosophy is you have to understand what utility is and where do you assign utility, and like that's a fundamental question that can go in all sorts of different directions. And she's not like, utilitarianism is not being undermined here. Her problem is like her definition of what utility is and how she kind of ranks these things. It's the finer points. Yeah, the finer points of the philosophy. So it's not even that we're like totally toppling her philosophy. It's like the details of her philosophy are shifting around.
Yeah. It's just such an interesting
Yeah.
thing if Brandon's really relating to Jasnah and he's thinking it in a very faith-based mindset. Like, you can just not believe in God and not have an answer. Like, you don't need that, right? You can just be like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Like, you don't need necessarily a structure for that. Whereas Jasnah feels like, yes, I've come up with the best structure. And I don't know, I feel like it would more be like, this is the best thing I have for now, right? And I'm continually refining my moral philosophy rather than, and like adjusting the details, as you said, Joff.
And that's why I wonder too, like, once we have her historical context, is there a reason why she clings so thoroughly to utilitarianism? Like, is there a reason she clings to that so strongly that this would be devastating?
Maybe.
Like, I could see the argument that, like, they sort of, I mean, it's sort of something that we kind of lost in recent books. Roshar and, like, Alethkar, I guess in particular, is a very, you know, deeply religious place. Even if, like, it's not like, you know, it's not like, as far as I know, there's not like weekly service or anything for most people, at least, like Dark Eyes or whatever. But I could see the argument that she, like, grew up in an environment where even if she doesn't believe in the specific tenets of Vornism, or like the idea that there is a, you know, creator or whatever, that there would still be like a belief that, and I mean, you know, it's sort of like, do we think that the idea that you have, that oaths are important and like sticking to your beliefs are important, would be something that Jasnah would reject because she's doesn't believe in Vornism? Because you could make the argument that because of her culture, even if she doesn't believe in Vornism, whatever she does believe in is something that she has to, like, dogmatically, you know, subscribe to no matter what. Maybe, I don't know. I don't
doesn't have a lot
of callings.
Yeah. There's atheism is not a very prevalent idea, like, within her society. Like, she has gone a different way, and so I can definitely see how this idea that, you know, she hasn't really been able to thoroughly flesh out like what that means and looks like.
That's an interesting idea. I kind of don't love it because obviously Jasnah is supposed to be like a good, like, there's a representation aspect where it's like an atheist in a world where there is magic and things. And so if that's the route Brandon's going, I'm like, I don't think that's good, actually. But like, it would make sense that the character has that. You know, that's a different question.
I don't know. Some of that I don't think that I've quite voiced in that way. So I'm curious to go back. I'd like to go reread the sequence again with that in mind, and just
same.
see if I have different thoughts than I did the last couple times
in a while.
I'm just really interested. Book 10 Jasnah. And Brandon's like, yeah, book 10's Jasnah. And I'm like, there's no way he doesn't have an ending in mind for all of this whole series, right? And so that makes it sound like, yeah, that's going to be very connected with Jasnah stuff and the flashbacks and things. And I don't know, it's tough. And I also think people can be rightfully annoyed that if Jasnah in book 1 is portrayed as being, I am very good at philosophy, and then we get to philosophy battle, if, like, she doesn't live up to the hype, people are going to feel disappointed. I think I made a meme of this, and so I'll put it on screen, of the horse that's well drawn, Jasnah, philosophy and Way of Kings, and then it's the stick figure horse and Wind and Truth. I find that meme very funny in this situation. Don't you worry, guys, except for maybe things where it's hard for the beta readers to actually comment because of the structure of how beta reads go. Most everything is commented on, and the Jasnah debate had a lot of discourse. Don't you worry. Like, what? Wasn't there like 80 beta readers? I don't know if there's that many.
I mean,
There's so many.
Like, over 50. Over 50.
It was interesting. In the Jordan Kine panel, they were saying there were more beta comments than there was a book for Wind and Truth.
Yeah, the text of it. Yeah, that's been true of Oathbringer. Oathbringer, Rhythm of War.
I believe it.
Like, just the pure word count. There are more text of beta comments than the entire book.
There's like a million words of beta comments, I think I
Yeah.
heard Peter say somewhere.
Yeah, that's not surprising to me in the
Sounds
slightest.
great.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um,
So we'll end things up with some Brandon thoughts on Fen, where Striker Easy says, I'm curious why you think Fen's decision here was foreshadowed earlier in the series. Even to me, who didn't mind the debate, it kind of felt out of left field. Brandon, key things to watch for are the discussions of her as a deal maker, her distrust of the Alethi, and dissatisfaction with Dalinar making decisions for her, and her loyalty to her kingdom. I really do think her decision is the right one in her situation. Fen is a person who would take the average hit point in D&D at level up, instead of taking the roll to see if she can get higher. She knows a good deal when she sees one. In this case, the choice seems clear. Get a 7 out of 10 deal from Teravangian now, or risk a 0 or 10, depending on what Dalinar did. She'd always been upset that the Kholins moved without her, and felt like it was happening again. She liked them, but the needs of her people dictated taking the 7, an above average deal, instead of holding out for a man who had vanished and might not even show up to the contest, and if he did, might happen to forget the needs of her people, as he made a very real and manifest mistake in the negotiations with Odium already, leading to the battles they were now fighting. I think if you presented the situation to someone external who didn't have the attachment to Dalinar we have by being in his head, the choice is pretty clear. For the same reason people at home tend to scream at the people making bad expected value choices on game shows, risking a very good deal because they see stars and dollar signs. Fen is a pragmatist. This is the pragmatic decision. Math professor Eric here, expected value is just the expected winnings you would get in like a game, right? You can consider it in a variety of ways, but say you paid $1 for a lottery ticket. How much on average do you win? That's called the expected value. And lotteries, it's negative. Don't play the lottery, kids. That's Professor Eric here. That's my message for you guys. Don't play the lottery. It's designed to screw you.
But what if I have ATM?
Well, then you need a lot of ATM because you need to have enough to see the balls there. I don't know if ATM's gonna do enough. Maybe pure ATM, but we definitely don't need to get into that tangent.
Way off topic. Sorry.
Yeah. Hey, what do we think about that in here?
I think I would just say that talking about how you feel that she was mischaracterized or characterized differently than she had been in previous books is different than saying that you think that like she shouldn't or shouldn't have taken the deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like for me at least, I felt that it was sort of like she was like, a silent participant in the debate, just like, like watching a tennis match, like looking at Teravangian and then looking at Jasnah and saying, oh, that's a good point. That's a good point. And then eventually she just comes to a decision. And I mean, that's sort of joking a bit about it, but I felt that, I agree with Brandon's characterization of her as being someone who was never really super comfortable with working with Alethi and that kind of stuff. Like, that's definitely all stuff that he did write about in previous books. But he also consistently wrote her as being someone who would like speak her mind and, that kind of thing, which I felt in the debate was not something that she was doing.
I think he really undermines like the biggest frustration I had in all these scenes is he's like undercutting here with she doesn't trust the Alethi. She's dissatisfied with Dalinar making decisions. She's a pragmatist. All these things. The thing that bothered me most was when Taravangian's like, aha, Jasnah had plans to assassinate you if you didn't, and I'm like, she's the pragmatist, the one who doesn't trust the Alethi. That would be like, of course, I haven't trusted the Alethi all along. Of course, they have a plan to assassinate me.
True.
I had my spies.
Not a surprise.
Like that was the most frustrating thing for me.
And the sky is also blue.
Yeah, like I don't know, he gets like that happens, and Finn is like deeply hurt. She's like, oh, I would never actually, what? Like I'm like, you're the one that doesn't trust the Alethi. That is a pragmatist. Like, of course they had plans in case so yeah.
She's a queen too. Like, it's not like she hasn't experienced like this idea of like somebody being able to betray her in a deal before. Like she feels so taken aback by it, like genuinely surprised when, I mean, you can hope and expect that like they will abide by the deal, but that doesn't mean you don't have contingencies. I think basically every country in the world should have like these like backup plans, and
They're gonna have the admirals
like
make the war plans, even if you don't need the war plans.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
that's not.
exactly.
They all do. That's fine.
Like, you can have the war plans and never need to use them, and that's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
But you don't not have the war plans.
Yeah, you make the war games and just be like, okay, what's gonna happen in this situation? Yeah, of course.
It's almost like like imagine like Finn had like betrayed them the same way Taravangian did. Like I would think she'd be like concerned about her allies if they didn't have plans to take her out. If she turned into like, you know, she like she wants allies that are smarter than that.
Admittedly, I did kind of like the moment where like that difference between Jasnah and Fen there, but yeah, it doesn't quite fit with this characterization here. But I mean, of course, we also have to talk about how there was the written contract for assassination, which, you know, David's talked about. I think that's a ridiculous, somewhat silly thing. But
on the deal itself, I didn't feel like they quite explored well enough, like Taravangian's inherent like untrustworthiness. Like he's a god, he's a shard, he makes problems, he's bound by them. Like he kind of makes that decision, and I felt like they kind of moved on and just accepted that premise. But Taravangian is a sneaky guy, and lo and behold, as soon as this is over,
they know he's a sneaky guy.
Yeah. Like now the whole planet is like covered in clouds, and there's no sunlight for Thelena. Hopefully that's not going to like wreck their economy. Hey,
you know, they still have the shipping lanes. Okay. You know, they'll be fine.
They'll probably be in good shape. But the point is like Taravangian has always been this really slippery guy. Just because he's making a deal that makes sense, you gotta be careful. And I think that I kind of felt like Finn made the right decision. I think I felt like it was rationalized well enough.
Yeah.
But I wish there was a little bit more, especially of Jasnah pushing back on, are you kidding me? Like you can't trust me. You can't trust this guy.
But you can't trust Odin either. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that leads into the whole discussion of like Jasnah pushing back against Taravangian's bad arguments, you know, in a sense. Like there's something to be said about the philosophy all crashing around you. But like, I think that's what frustrates people about this.
I did feel like it was mostly earned. Like Finn choosing to go with Odium, the logic was mostly there for me.
Oh, I absolutely agree with that. I definitely have seen many people say it's like, wow, Finn just doesn't sit. She's just there. She's in that scene too, basically, and doesn't do a whole lot. And I think that's
again, it's not about the choice that she makes, because everybody kind of agrees, okay, yeah, it was the clear choice considering the situation. It's about how she is presented in the scene.
Yeah.
That people really have a problem with.
Anywho, did you like our mini Jasnah episode here, guys? A lot to talk about. We're going to have a Jasnah episode eventually when the Shardcasters bring up the courage to reread this and go back into the fray, which fortunately we don't have to do a bit because we have Words of Brandon to do, guys. Hey. But you know what?
And then we're gonna have Ember Dark,
and we're gonna have Ember Dark. But you know, we'll get through all the Wind and Truth stuff. Maybe the controversial Wind and Truth stuff is better to do when there's some more distance. You know, then we can all just like go back. We can do a reread, see what people think on a reread. Guys, I'm sick, so we're not doing Who's That Cosmere Character. I'm sorry. We're at like 2 hours, 40 minutes. I've had such a May, guys. You don't even know what. Sorry. I mean, I don't know when this episode's even coming out, but sorry for missing a thing before the Brandon episode because I've had a super fun time. But hope you enjoyed the Brandon interview. I hope you enjoyed these comments. Of course, I do you think it is dangerous for Brandon to comment on like negativity, right? Like that's always a very dangerous thing to do as a creator. I think he did it in a pretty classy way where he's like, these are my intentions. If that didn't come across to you, that's my problem. That's not your problem. Like so I think he dealt with it as classily as he could. And I do like seeing some of his artistic decisions, and like understand what's going on with that. And I really appreciate that.
And like, here's the thing with me and like Brandon talking about writing. I feel like at this point where I've watched like 2 or 3 like lecture series, like those are already getting like a bit repetitive because those are very like overall things. I like seeing like these granular reasons for why he did something the way he did. And like with more specific examples rather than the generic Star Wars examples or, the example he always points to about like setting up like expectations in Oathbringer. Like they get a little bit repetitive. And so I really like seeing this side of like writerly Brandon. But it's also a slippery slope of like commenting on negativity. Even if he did this in a very classy way, I feel that there's been other instances with other things where he hasn't. And so it's a really tough line to walk.
Yeah. And Brandon talked about this more in our interview, which we're absolutely doing a Word of Brandon episode on that. We'll get in there, but Brandon talked about, the whole George Lucas-ing of things where, maybe if like we could change a thing, but George Lucas is like, no, we've kind of poisoned the well for later revisions of things. And Brandon didn't even really like doing the change in Words of Radiance. We're not going to see the changes ever. But that's fine.
Like you said in, I think, the episode as well, like art is never finished, only abandoned.
Brandon could have spent 5 more years. He could have spent 10 more years on the book and make it a Winds of Winter. Like he could do that. And whether you like the book or not, which is all totally fair, I can really see why Brandon's like, I want to finish all the books I want to write. And if some of them are a bit weaker, I would like to have that done and not be dead. And so I'm like, that makes sense to me. I still think a bit more time would have been good on this one.
And I do think that he rightly pointed out that most of that extra time that people keep thinking of in their minds of like the break between Stormlight books was for other things. It was for the secret projects.
Yeah, true.
And so the timeline for Wind and Truth ended up being kind of the same, even if we think of it as longer.
Yeah.
Like, people forget that, and I think it was good to point out, I do wish there had been a little bit of extra time. Even if it's just to fix up more of those like surface level things, like the language and like all these other things that are a little bit.
Brandon just doesn't do a draft on that. He's never done a draft on that after the 10% cut. I don't know. Maybe.
He's also like, Brandon does not love editing, and like there's only like so much.
Oh,
so, like,
true.
There's diminishing returns on like him being able to spend more time on the book to make a book better, because he's just going to get more and more worn out with it. That's going to affect his energy for the next project. Like he wants to take a break and move on. And it's especially difficult when the decisions you have to make, a lot of times you don't know if they're a lot of these he's saying like, I think this is the right decision, but time will tell. And so it's hard to be like, oh, let me spend another month rewriting this, this scene, but like, what's the cost benefit on, is it actually going to end up being better, or am I actually going to overthink it and turn it in and make a decision that was actually the wrong decision when I could have moved on and written the next book I'm excited to write it out.
Well, and that I think that's the thing with a few YouTube comments who are like saying like, I want Brandon's kind of pure experience. I don't want like beta readers and things, which the beta readers definitely do make the book better. And Brandon definitely likes seeing the test audience. Like, God, I can't imagine what people would think of Wind and Truth without a test audience for Brandon to like change some things. I don't think people would like it. But at the same time, if you do too many revisions, are you just watering down your artistic vision for a thing,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's impossible to know whether that's the case because you're only going to have your first read once of it. And maybe if he revises more, that leads to other problems. And then it's just the constant cycle of never-ending revisions and things.
Which, again, we've seen with other authors.
Hey, so, but that all that being said, he did do the last draft of this in 2 months, and I think that is way too short of that. That's insane to me. Even as Brandon's a full-time author, I don't know, this book seems real long to me. Okay, interesting. But, Brandon does what he wants to do. Don't worry, his artistic integrity is not going to be watered down. I think he uses the test audience to make sure he is executing his artistic intention correctly. He's not doing that. If people are like, yeah, this decision is wrong, and Brandon's like, I like Gavinor as the champion, and so that's what it's going to be. That's what it's going to be. If you guys don't like the quip, tough. That's being in the book. And, maybe some of those are wrong decisions, but they're Brandon's decisions. That's the thing.
He's mentioned in writing class, too, that he looks in betas for when people are bored because he wants that feedback so he can adjust it to match what he's trying to do.
Yeah, because if the reaction is, oh, I'm getting bored of this scene, and Brandon's like, oh, that's not what I want. It's like, oh, I can change these things, and then now you will be less bored. It's really useful. Having gone through the process myself, it's very useful.
Yeah, it goes back to that comment that Jancy once had, some video with Brandon that once in college, some writing professor told her or someone told her you should add rats with swords to this, and it made no sense. Things like that. That's not what the beta readers are there for.
No suggestions in betas.
To refine that artistic intention of I'm getting bored, or I didn't think that. I mean, this is a continuity issue. These are my opinions about this character, and say if you hated this character as a person and the character was supposed to feel lovable, because sometimes you want readers to hate a character, but if it's completely incongruous with what you're trying to do, then that's what you have to fix. It's not about adding completely new elements, which people forget about in writing workshops sometimes. That my whole rants have been there.
This is the emotion
in the writing channel a million times.
This is the emotion I'm going for. Am I getting that emotion?
Yep. And I will adjust things to fix that, potentially. But, again, if everyone complains about every quip, Brandon just can't cut every quip, right? That's just not how it works. But you can still totally not like the therapist one, It makes Brandon smile, and I think that's really kind of the metric for a joke getting in these books, I'll be totally honest. If Brandon likes it, it's getting in the book, and that's what's going to happen. Anyway, we're just kind of rambling, so let's close this one out, guys. We can talk about overall philosophy of all these things for so long, and we probably will. We have so many years before the Cosmere is finished, and is this podcast still going to be a thing? Maybe, I don't know. We'll see. But who can say what's happening in 20 years, right? But thank you all for listening. You can find us on 17shard.com for all your news, discussion, theories, and fun that you could ever want. We have a very busy Discord server with lots of Wind and Truth discussion, although our Wind and Truth spoiler period is over. It's demonstrably over at this stage.
It's on the 6th, right?
Oh, yeah, no. Yeah, no. The spoiler period is definitely over, regardless of when this episode comes out. Perfect. Great. But you can still discuss all the books there. You can support us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. We commission awesome art pieces, and you can vote on which art pieces you want. And we also have a Who's That Cosmere Character priority queue for our highest tier of patrons, which is not helped by me not doing that this episode. But, hey, we'll get to them. So we will see you all next time. I don't know what order these episodes are going to come out, but we will soon do an episode on our Words of Brandon that we got in our interview. Check it out if you haven't already. Brandon's a pretty cool guy. I like listening to him talk all the time. I will listen to him more. So thanks everybody, and see you next time.
Bye.
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 Caw.